Thank you very much, Madeline. I don't think we could have hoped for a more fitting note to introduce this series of conversations about New Orleans 10 years after the storm struck it. My name is James Bennet. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and it's my privilege to welcome you all, including those of you watching on our live stream at theatlantic.com. I also want to welcome the viewers watching on C-SPAN and listeners tuning in on WWNO. More than 100 years ago, in 1901, The Atlantic published a story about New Orleans that declared, as New Orleans is one of those few cities in this country with a past, so likewise it has always been the city of the future, a city of vast possibilities in the plans of France and then of Spain, of Napoleon, of Thomas Jefferson, and the United States. 10 years ago, there were many who wondered if Hurricane Katrina had permanently foreclosed those possibilities and put an end to those ambitions, if the city could ever recapture its former character and its old sense of promise. Actually, in keeping, I think, with the tone and spirit of Maddie's poetry, we're hoping to take a close look today, not sentimentally, but also not cynically, at the hard work that's been done here over the past 10 years to bring New Orleans back, at the successes and at the mistakes as well, and at the work that's left to be done. How has the city and how have its people been transformed by Katrina, and what hasn't really changed? How is life better here now, and in what ways might it be worse? And what might the future look like for New Orleans? What big plans are there on the table today? I feel particularly grateful to be here because 10 years ago I was on a team of reporters that the New York Times sent down here to cover the aftermath of Katrina. My own experience here was, of course, superficial, but it still left indelible impressions of the suffering and the frustration and the generosity that came during and after the storm. For the conversations today, we've brought together artists, environmentalists, politicians, engineers, community activists, and others. We're going to begin in a moment with a panel that will address the question of what it means to really know this city. It's a question that the Atlantic has returned to from time to time across the decades, and some elements of the portrait we've provided have been quite consistent and might have some resonance today. In that same story from 1901, the writer described New Orleans as a city of gaiety and pleasure in spite of her myriad sorrows. Then in 1940, in a similar vein, the Atlantic reported, New Orleans is old and has seen much and is a little weary, but she's still beautiful and quietly conscious of her charm. That particular writer went into substantially more detail. He added that New Orleans is an easygoing, pleasure-loving, colorful, odoriferous, church-attending city whose dead are buried above ground and whose politics is carried on underground. That was, of course, a long time ago, and I look forward to hearing the panel update these descriptions. But first, I have a couple of important program notes. If you're on Twitter, and it's hard, by the way, not to wonder how Twitter might have affected response times if it had existed 10 years ago. Please feel free to join the conversation at Atlantic_live. The hashtag is AtlanticNOLA. We also hope you'll join the conversation here in the hall. We've built in time for Q&A throughout the day, and my colleagues will be circulating in the hall with microphones. I want to thank the underwriters who have helped make this gathering possible. We're very grateful for the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and Jones Walker, and also our collaborators at the Urban Institute. Finally, I'd like to remind you to please silence your cell phone, because if it rings while the next speaker is on stage, that would be a grave sin indeed. She is the very great journalist Gwen Ifill of PBS NewsHour, and she will introduce her panelists.